Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I hope you're all doing well. I'm very excited today. I have a very special guest with us who's a legend and has introduced Vedic astrology to the West. I now welcome James Braha. Hello.
Thank you. So, we'll talk about Pluto today, one of the outer planets. And, the ancients didn't use Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, not because they didn't know about them. They knew about them somehow, but they couldn't see them. And
Right.
they consider it an observational science. But to not use Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, you miss so much information, so much information. And it's to me it seems a real sign of Kali Yuga that in Kali Yuga the most powerful planet of all in the horoscope, Pluto, about 25 years ago, the astronomers for some reason decided let's get rid of Pluto. It's not a planet. When I heard this, I nearly fell over because Pluto has the biggest impact of
Right.
any planet. It's just a massively intense influence in the horoscope. So Pluto was discovered, I think, around 1930, around the time when nuclear power was being created, bombs, the mafia, dictators, Mussolini and Hitler, all of this intense power was coming into play when Pluto was discovered. And Pluto is a fascinating influence because it's it represents the ability to regenerate, to just regenerate. I'm writing a book now called Vedic Astrology, the Braha Sutras,
Beautiful.
which always makes me laugh. And I'm talking about Pluto's influence and how if you find a horoscope that is very afflicted, where the confidence is weak or there's big problems, if Pluto is very powerful and aspects, now I'm speaking more from the Western system because there's no aspects to use in the Hindu chart, but in the Western chart, if Pluto is powerful, meaning it's angular or conjunct a planet, but if it's well aspected with trines and sextiles, those are particular aspects in the Western chart, the person then has the ability to regenerate. So if you look at people who have had very, very, very traumatic childhoods, you find some that never recover, and you find others that can just get over it and somehow, and it's funny the way life works, but just today I was thinking I had such a horrible, horrible childhood, and it was so bad that what I've been able to, have a life that's been fulfilling, that's had a lot of success, that's had a lot of impact. It startles me sometimes how bad my life was and how difficult. And yet, in my 40s and 50s, well, I mean, I wrote my first book in my 30s, but as life went on, the ability to regenerate and self-improve is massive because of Pluto. Because in my chart, Pluto happens to be what's considered my dominant planet. It's stronger than the others, makes more aspects, etc. So Pluto people that have very, very powerful Plutos, they are able to regenerate and self-improve, but they also want to save the world. So Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, they're all spiritual influences. Uranus is considered the higher octave, the higher vibration of Mercury. Neptune is considered the higher vibration of Venus. Pluto is considered the higher octave of Mars. However, my first astrology teacher, Isabel Hickey, used to say that Pluto is really a higher octave of the moon. And I actually believe it's both. Pluto is a higher octave of Mars when you see the intensity and the aggression and things that dictators do. But it's also a higher octave of the moon because Pluto is it's an enormously sensitive influence. It's just, it creates, in other words, when you see Pluto people who are in jail, who got thrown in jail for murdering and so many times it's not with Pluto, it's not calculated murder, it's revenge. They get so angry. Now
Mm.
you could say that's a higher octave of Mars, and sometimes it is. But as a Pluto person, I can tell you that the sensitivity is so deep that when you experience pain, it's so deep, it's so emotional. So it feels like a higher octave of the moon, as well as Pluto. I mean, as well as Mars. Um, but the influence for Uranus, because Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, they're spiritual influences. A person that is Uranian, they enjoy helping other people as well, but more through astrology, more through insights. They are psychic from insights. Neptune people are mystical. Neptune people love to think about God and the infinite, and Neptune people may like science fiction and things that are way out there. A Neptunian person is spiritual in the sense that they have very little boundaries. They're unbounded, like the sign Pisces. Pisces people have no boundaries. 12th house people have no boundaries. They love meditation. That's Neptune. Pluto is more like Scorpio.
Mm.
It's power, it's regenerating, it's healing. So people that are Plutonian, if they're on the positive side and the spiritual side, they have really strong desires to heal. The same way a moon person wants to take care of you, a Pluto person really wants to nurture, but more than, it's an impersonal nurturing. The Pluto person wants to heal the world, save the world, like that. Anyway, so Pluto is also very explosive and it's very intense. I mentioned this on a video on Pluto. I once said to my son when he was, I don't know what, 8 or 10 years old, I said, if you had one word to describe your dad, what would it be? And I was stunned at what he said. He said, intense,
Ah.
intense. And it's true. I have an intensity that I'm not always aware of. I had no idea that my son would find me intense.
Mm.
Anyway, that's Pluto. That's the Pluto influence. So Pluto in the first house. First of all, whenever I talk about something connected to the first house, I always distinguish how close it is to the ascendant.
Right.
So you could have Pluto in the first house 10, 15, 20 degrees away from the ascendant. You could also have Pluto in the first house within 3 or 4 degrees of the ascendant, and there will be a difference. I mean, it just gets more intense. But the person with Pluto in the first house, first of all, is going to be spiritually oriented generally.
Mm.
Secondly, they're going to be extremely sensitive. It's as a higher octave of the moon. They're going to be extremely sensitive, but they're also going to be powerful. They're
Mhm.
going to be a survivor. They can survive anything. Now, if Pluto is in the first house, I generally say that the person is going to be extremely sensitive. And when I talk about past lives and things like that, karma, I try to be very careful because no one no one knows the past lives. We just have a general idea. When people get too specific about it, I start to get very wary because you could say anything you want. How's the person going to say no? It's their past life. But I take it that if a person has Pluto in the first house, they're going to be very sensitive and they're going to get a lot of feedback from other people their whole lives, their whole life. And that feedback, I believe, is because in past lifetimes the person was aggressive, or they used their personality in an overly intense, misused way. So in this lifetime, they get a lot of feedback. You're being good, you're being not good, you're being this way, you're being that way. And they don't like it. They're very sensitive, but that they're getting that so that they can learn how to be more balanced. If Pluto is within 3 or 4 degrees of the ascendant, it becomes a difficult lifetime in the sense that there's constantly this feedback. And Pluto, like Scorpio, represents death and rebirth. Death and rebirth. Something is dying and then being reborn. So if Pluto is with Venus in the love life, they feel like they're dying, they're having these terrible death experiences in love matters, and then they get reborn. If Pluto is with Mercury, the mind can have, these intense death-like experiences and then gets reborn. So if Pluto's in the first house, this death and rebirth experience is constant. They constantly feel like they are hurting inside, dying, and then they get over it. And the worst way to use that Pluto energy, if you have it, is to say, I'm experiencing pain, so I will try to control life so I don't have to experience. That will not work. Life is changeable and you have to flow with life. You can't control it. If they do, it becomes very bad. But the Pluto person with Pluto in the first house wants to save other people, wants to heal other people. They're great healers. They're always going through this painful death and rebirth. But they're very powerful. They can be leaders. They can be very powerful. They can create great change in the world. They can have a great impact like that. If Pluto transits into the first house, if Pluto's been going through the 12th house, that would be a spiritual transit where the person is gaining a lot of insights from the subconscious mind. They're having a lot of dreams at night because of Pluto transiting the 12th house. It's very inward, psychological, emotional, psychological, subconscious work going on. When Pluto transits and hits the ascendant, then it's like a volcano or an earthquake. And the person may feel this huge, intense releasing of energy. Depends how old they are when it occurs. But I always tell a person if I see Pluto coming close to the ascendant, I say, look, when Pluto hits that ascendant, you're going to feel enormous potential. Pluto is potential, and it's this potential energy that you can harness, like they harnessed it for an atom bomb. So when Pluto hits the ascendant, it's like an earthquake, and the personality suddenly anything that's been repressed or held back now bursts forth. And I tell the person, you're likely to have an experience for about a year, because Pluto will sit hitting that ascendant on and off for about a year. And when that happens, the person may suddenly get a real sense of their own power and what they're capable of. And I tell the person, when that sense of power comes, use it. Don't wait, because a lot of times Pluto will transit the sun, conjunct the sun, and the person has this enormous sense of power because the sun is your confidence and your willpower. And people feel fate, like something is destined to occur. But a lot of times what they'll do is they'll feel like, oh, now I'm going to become powerful. Now I'm going to become famous. Now I'm going to be great at this. And they wait for nature to put them in a special position. You can't do that. When the power is there and the intensity is there, you have to say, okay, now is the time to act and to use the Pluto energy. And when Pluto goes into that first house, those are the years when a person can be most powerful, personally powerful.
And it's best to see, is it like when we're seeing these transits, we're seeing it like, does it matter where we're seeing, can we look at it from the moon as well ascendant, or it's best to go from ascendant? Like, for example, like,
I don't use Chandra Lagna so much I do use it for transits. I do use it for transits, but I don't know. I mean, when it comes to Pluto, I've never used Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto in the Hindu chart. I just haven't used it that way.
Okay.
Um, but if Pluto conjuncts the moon, you're going to see some very big effects.
Mm.
You're going to see. When it comes to transits, you have to look at, in the Hindu chart, you have to look at them from the point of view of the ascendant and the moon. And the transits from the ascendant will be much more important than from the moon. This is extremely important. I mentioned this in the Sutras book because the texts always say use the transits from the moon. And they don't say use them also from the ascendant because it's obvious. The transits from the moon are not as important because all people born on the same day will have the same moon transits.
Right.
Sometimes the moon could be in two different signs in a 24-hour period, so you get a little overplay. But in the natal chart, in 24 hours, there's going to be all these different transits for the different people. So the transits from the ascendant are far more important than the moon, but you have to look at both. Pluto in the second house has to do with money.
Mm.
Has to do with money. Now, I have to say that, I was a Western astrologer, but not professionally, but I studied for 5-6 years before Hindu Vedic. So when I talk about Pluto and Uranus, Neptune, it's more from the point of view of the Western chart, because I don't use it so much in the Hindu.
Right.
But when Pluto is in the second house, it has to do not just with money, but with self-value. So when Pluto goes into the second house, the person suddenly becomes consumed with making a lot of money. Or if Pluto is natally in the second house, the person often wants to be very, very wealthy. But it also has to do with how you feel about your own value. This is important. And a person, now, the thing is, Pluto is a massive malefic. So, so Pluto in the house of the mother might kill the mother. Pluto in the house of the father, the 10th house, you'll find people that have Pluto in the 10th house and their father died very early just because of Pluto. Even though it's got this very powerful feature, it also has this other. I always talk about, for people that know the tarot cards,
Yes.
the Fool, the zero, I think it's called 0 or 22, the Fool.
Mm.
On one hand, he's a complete fool. On the other, he's the most powerful, wise being. So Pluto is like that. It can destroy a house or a planet, or it can intensify that planet, make it very powerful. It's hard to know. I mean, as astrologers, we all have some psychic ability, so you can usually feel whether this was going to really hurt the father if it's in the 10th, or do something else. But Pluto in the second house has to do, people with Pluto in the second house, if I see that, I immediately start to look at the Hindu chart to see whether the second and the 11th, if the 11th house and the second house interchange, the ruler of the second is in the 11th ruler in the second, the rulers of 2 and 11 aspect each other, or just a very strong 11th and a very strong second, that means big money. You don't get rich from a powerful second house. You earn well from the second, but you get wealthy when the 11th is involved, the large sums of money. So if I see Pluto in the second house, I immediately start to look and see, does this chart look like a wealthy person? Because that will do it.
Right.
That will do it. Now, the Pluto in the second house could also have a negative effect on the person's sense of values, their own self-value. So then I start looking in the Hindu chart to see, is Saturn with the sun or the moon or the ascendant ruler, or is it right on the ascendant? If Saturn is close to the ascendant, the sun, the ascendant ruler, or the moon, then Pluto in the second house is probably meaning that the person feels they have no value. When Pluto goes into the second house, I tell the person, if I'm doing a horoscope where I can tell that the person, they just don't feel valuable. And people need to feel, in order to have a successful life, people must feel two things. They must feel capable and they must feel lovable.
Right.
And if they don't have that, life doesn't work. And Pluto in the second house, in some cases, will tell you that the person, they feel they have no value. But on the other hand, if they feel really valuable, that's part of what makes them become wealthy. I am really valuable. I should be on the top of the world, owning all this money and possessions and value, etc.
So if someone has like Pluto in the second house and they also have Saturn there, so will they feel like that'll restrict them?
So when you say Pluto and Saturn is both there, the question is, are they 2 degrees away from each other? Or are they 20 degrees away from each other? That's going to be so, because if Pluto and Saturn are together anywhere in the horoscope, Saturn becomes overbearing.
Mm.
Pluto Saturn conjunct means that the person is so overly responsible and burdened and disciplined. They overdo everything, right? Now they are also the most capable of being disciplined, and they can achieve things other people cannot achieve because they are relentless in whatever the task is. They will relentlessly pursue it until they succeed. But it brings a lot of burden. It brings a lot of, hard work and labor and things like that. So the Pluto and Saturn in the second house, if they're very close together, it could be that the person is constantly working very, very, very hard and diligently to build money or something like that. But it could also be an instance where the self value, could be not so good, because Pluto will intensify that Saturn, and it could make the person feel, they're not valuable.
Right.
That's a bit complicated. Pluto in the third house. Now, the third house in Western astrology is the mind and its communications. And I can tell you flat out. Now, in the Hindu chart, I use the second house for writing and teaching, and I use the fifth house for the mind, and it works perfectly. But I can tell you, if Pluto is in the third house of that Western horoscope, I can tell you that person is going to be compulsive about communicating. They are going to want to talk and write and teach and communicate. They may also have intense experiences with brothers and sisters. Uh, the Pluto in the third house, it could be that they have a brother or a sister that is very intense, famous, or troubled. It depends. I mean, Pluto is like the Fool. It can be the worst, it can be the best.
Right.
But if Pluto is in the third house, they don't have your average typical experience with the sibling below them. I usually take a planet in the third house as representing the sibling right below you. So a person with Pluto in the third house, they're not going to have some average, ordinary, superficial sibling. The sibling's either going to be fantastic and intense and powerful, or they're going to have serious trouble. But the Pluto in the third house is immensely powerful for writings and teachings and communications. If Pluto transits into the third house, then I tell the person, get ready, get ready. If you have any desires to write or teach, your 15 or 20 or 30 or 40 years are coming up. Pluto is such a weird planet. It can transit through a house for 30 or 40 years, or 12 or 15 years. It's Pluto, most people only get 5 or 6 Pluto transits in a lifetime. You don't get 12 houses transits of Pluto. Yeah. But if Pluto is going into the third house, I also warn them to keep an eye on their siblings. When
Okay.
Pluto, usually when the planet goes into the house, that's when you will immediately see the effects. Even though the effects can be there the whole time, it's when it enters that house, take a look at your siblings. And the mind, it's not just that you want to write and teach, it's that suddenly the mind begins exploding. The mind becomes extremely passionate and intense and like that. Pluto in the fourth house gives very intense experiences with the mother. In the Western chart, the angular houses are the most powerful. If a planet's in the first, the fourth, the seventh, or the 10th, those are the most intense influences. So Pluto in the fourth house is a very intense influence. And it has to do with the home and mother. And in the Western chart, it has to do with what you got from your ancestors. The fourth house is your ancestry and your home. It's what you got from your home. So Pluto in the fourth house is going to mean that the mother may have been like a dictator, may have been, brutal or smothering or intense, or the mother could be extremely spiritual and powerful. Okay. But planets in the fourth house are very deeply ingrained. They're very deeply ingrained. And so they have a big effect. And with Pluto in the fourth house, there's almost always a desire for a mansion or a big home or a farm or something special with the land. The person may love farming. I have Pluto in the fourth house, along with Venus Mars conjunct. Now they're kind of far apart. In the Western, Pluto's 11 degrees. I'm not sure. Maybe 20 degrees Leo, I think, something like that. And then Venus and Mars is in the fourth house, but in a different sign in the Western. So, but in any case, having Pluto in the fourth house, along with Venus Mars, as soon as I bought a house, I started building extra rooms. I put 40 fruit trees on the land. And it was natural for me because you have a real what?
What kind of fruit trees?
Well, I have 5 mango trees,
Oh, nice.
different varieties. I didn't know that mangoes are the most, they are, out of all the fruits on the planet, they are the ones that are more people eat mangoes as a fruit than any other fruit. I didn't know that. I have 5 mango trees. When I was in India, I got addicted to the sitafal.
Oh, yeah.
The sitafal, cherimoya, etamoya, custard apple. And I used to eat them every day, and they were so sweet. And when I moved here to Longboat Key in the middle of Florida, I went to the nursery and I saw the custard apples, and I bought one of those. And the seeds germinate so easily that I wound up putting 3 or 4 seedlings all over the property. So I have a lot of that. I have 3 lychee trees.
Oh,
I
lychee.
have
Oh, yeah.
lychees. Yeah, I have 2 longan trees, which are they call them dragon eyes.
Yeah.
I have a neem tree. I have a moringa tree. Moringa
Moringa leaf. Oh, yeah. It's very good.
moringa leaf,
Very
and
popular.
a neem. Yeah, and the neem, I for a while I was putting it in the blender and drinking it. Oh my God, it's very intense. Yeah, and then papayas and limes and lemons, a lot of trees.
Nice.
Anyway, that's the Pluto in the fourth house. And because it's angular, it's going to become a strong influence in the person's life. So they may also have that desire to heal people and things like that. When Pluto enters the fourth house by transit, then I tell the person, when Pluto gets into the fourth house, assuming that they're not 20, that they're, older, when Pluto gets in the fourth house, the person is going to start to think, what would be the best place of all for me to live? They start to think, is this really the ideal place? Is this where I have the most power? Is this where I can have the greatest life? That will be connected to the Pluto going into the fourth house. But I will also say, keep an eye on your parents. If the person's older and Pluto's going into the fourth house, you have to keep an eye on your mother to make sure that that's not some illness coming her way.
Right.
But when Pluto goes into the fourth house, that's another influence for the person wanting a big house, wanting the best house, mansions, things like that. But the thing about the fourth house, as I said, it's deeply ingrained. So before I started meditating at the age of about 20, and that's when I went into spiritual life. And I remember I was an actor, and at the end of each semester, we would get comments from all the teachers. And there was this teacher, and he said, "Jimmy, if you don't settle down, you're going to get an ulcer." And that was because I had so much intensity, but I hadn't begun meditating, so there was nothing to take away the stress of it. But a lot of that intensity that he was seeing was from the fourth house. It's this energy that's deeply ingrained from your childhood, and that's the fourth house. So the Pluto in the fourth house can make if the person's going to be like a tyrant or a dictator, that can be from Pluto in the first. It can be from Pluto in the fourth. Those two houses are very personal, and they make this person that's very intense. But it's very powerful for land and real estate and possibly spiritual mother. Pluto in the fifth house is a compulsion to create. The fifth house in the Hindu is the mind. In the Western, it's the arts. My oldest brother was an actor his whole life, and he was always on stage. Like, if he was in the room, he would be making you laugh or being very dramatic. Pluto in the fifth house is a desire to create. Now, some people will use that to create children. Your children are your creative. You create children. They come from you. So the Pluto in the fifth can be powerful children, intense, famous children. Could also be a child who's a drug addict or a child who's got big problems if it goes on the negative side. But the main influence would be self-expression. Look at me, look at me, look at me, look at me. This is what I did. This is what I did. This is what I did. The fifth house is like the house of Leo. Leo is the sign of leaders and performers and politicians. So the Pluto in the fifth house makes this compulsion to create and to let people know what makes me unique and different from others. And it has to do with children. It can have to do with investments and speculations as well. It's a possibility, but I'd say it's not the most obvious. I'd say it's more likely to have to do with children and more likely to have to do with this creative endeavors. It's also love affairs. People with Pluto in the fifth house, their love affairs will not be smooth. They will be intense. I'm not talking about marriage. I'm talking about love affairs. They will not be smooth and easy. They will be intense. When Pluto enters the fifth house, I just did a reading today for a woman who had Pluto entering the fifth house. And I said, if you've ever done the arts in the past, your best period's coming up. You're going to start to feel really wanting to create and show people what's unique and special about you, like that. But I would also say, with Pluto entering the fifth house, you better keep your eye on your children to make sure that everything is okay there. Yeah. The sixth house. So Pluto in the sixth house, I'm going to start by telling you what happened when Pluto left my sixth house. I don't remember the exact year, but what I remember was that I had written several books by the time Pluto had left and gone into the seventh. As soon as Pluto went into the seventh house, I said, my God, why was I working so hard? All this intensity was going into the workplace while Pluto was transiting the sixth house. It's a long transit, 15 years, 20 years. It's a long transit. But as soon as it left, I said, wait a minute, isn't life supposed to be balanced? Isn't there supposed to be some fun? Isn't there? Why was I working so hard? But that's what I loved. I loved working. So Pluto in the sixth house is often a massively talented healer. You have the planet of death and rebirth, of regeneration, death and then rebirth and regenerating in the house of health and healing. So this makes for a very, very good healers, people that can put their hands on you and heal you and things like that. I don't know. There's a possibility. There is a possibility. I don't know. Usually my knowledge comes from a lot of experience, particularly with knowing. All I need to know is two or three people that have one of these things, and then you can start to see when it works the same for all of them. I don't think I know at this point anybody. I probably did at some point, but I don't really know many people with Pluto in the sixth house. But it might have something to do with their experience of enemies or jealous people. There's certainly a possibility of that. Um, but Pluto in the sixth house could be some serious health problems. It's a possibility. Again, Pluto can be either the greatest or it can be the most destructive. And Pluto in the sixth house. So if I see Pluto in the sixth house, I may start to look at whether the horoscope has some serious health problems.
Right.
And when you're looking at health problems, this is something I've been writing in this new book. When you're looking at health problems, when you start practicing astrology in the early days, you're always looking for the sixth house. Oh, Venus is in the sixth house. Problems with the kidneys, reproductive system, throat, thyroid. Oh, Mercury's in the sixth house. Problems with the lungs, intestines, nervous system. It took some years to find out that any planet in the chart, wherever it is, if it's afflicted, that's going to tell you the problems. If the moon is afflicted, problems with the stomach, the breast, the menstrual cycle. If Jupiter is afflicted, the liver, gallbladder, spleen. But something that I put in this new book is that when Jupiter is afflicted, it harms the liver, gallbladder, spleen, and it causes allergies. What people don't realize, a lot of times I'll say, do you have allergies? Because the horoscope is giving allergies. They'll say no. But they oftentimes have illnesses that are due to allergies and they don't know it.
Right.
And if you see a chart where both Jupiter and Mercury are seriously afflicted, they don't have to be in the first house or the sixth house. They don't have to be ruling the first or the sixth. If you simply have a horoscope with Jupiter and Mercury very afflicted, you're going to get a person who has health problems that they can't diagnose. The health problems are due to allergies and a delicate, harmed nervous system. The combination between the allergies and the nervous system both being devastated causes illnesses that are bizarre. My immune system doesn't work. This system doesn't work. They don't know what's causing it. Astrologically, you can predict this because it's connected to the combination of the weak nervous system and the allergies, both. When Pluto goes into the sixth house, I will tell them you're about to work harder than you've ever worked in many cases. But I will also say you are about to learn all kinds of healing methods, spiritual healing methods, methods that are beyond the ordinary, healing methods, Ayurveda, uh, uh, Chinese medicine, acupuncture, herbs, homeopathy. You're going to learn those kind of spiritual healing methods. But it's also possible you could suddenly have intense problems with bosses, employers, employees. Those are the different sixth house. When Pluto occupies the seventh house, I haven't said this yet, but I always say it when I get to the seventh house. If Pluto is in the seventh house, that's where the person's most intense experiences are going to occur. That's where their most intense growth is going to occur. Now, I should have said this way back at the start of this at the start of this. Whatever house Pluto occupies is likely to be where your greatest growth occurs. So my mother was mentally ill. Pluto is in my fourth house, and the pain and the suffering was enormous. But that's also where you are forced to grow. You're suffering, you want out of the suffering. And so that's where the growth is. Pluto in the seventh house tells me, natally tells me, that person's going to have death and rebirth experiences in the relationship. They're going to have arguments that are painful. They feel like they're dying, and the next day they're reborn. That's where the greatest growth will be, in the area of relationships. It can also mean a Plutonian partner. The partner may be famous or powerful, or they may be like a dictator. They may be like a tyrant. It's intense. That's the intensity. When Pluto enters the seventh house, I warn people, a massive, intense energy is coming into that marriage house. If the person is single and they've been single for a long time, this can energize the house and turn into a marriage, because it puts so much energy into that area. However, it can also be an explosive force that comes into the marriage. In general, in the Western chart, the bottom, the Western chart is a round horoscope with the first six houses the first six houses underneath, and the next six houses on top. And the first six houses are very personal. Me, my money, my siblings, my mother, my creativity, my work. The next six houses are very impersonal. They are the marriage partner and other people, eighth house, other people's money, ninth house, religion, 10th house, career. Those are more impersonal. So when Pluto hits the seventh house, it's going now upwards into the impersonal houses. So the rest of their life, there is more energy going toward the public and going toward activity that's going to be out in the world, like that. So if Pluto enters that seventh house, people have to keep an eye on their partner. Is the partner safe? Is the partner suddenly going to change? Is the marriage going to suddenly become very much more intense? Like that. Pluto in the eighth house is probably one of the best features for an astrologer. The eighth house itself is a house of metaphysics and astrology and psychic subjects. And the eighth house is a house of transformation. So a very strong eighth house is a person who is going to go through a lot of evolution and growth in this lifetime if the eighth house is very pronounced. If you put Pluto into that eighth house, now you have a person that is really interested in evolutionary growth and transformation. And the transformation and the evolution and the growth from the eighth house comes from learning to let go of attachment. Suffering comes in two ways. We suffer physically, and we suffer from attachment. There is nothing other than the physical, there is no suffering possible if we're not attached. If somebody says, hey, I'm going to take your money, if I don't care about money, they take my money. If they say, I'm going to beat your kid, if you don't care about your kid, go ahead, beat my kid. There's no suffering. But we have attachments. That's a natural attachment, of course. It's a healthy attachment. But the eighth house is all about learning to let go of the button. People can press your button they find out what you're sensitive about. They press that button and you suffer. So a person that has, planets in the eighth house, or planets in Scorpio, or especially Pluto in the eighth house, they're going to go through massive death and rebirth experiences in order to let go of their attachments, which will bring them closer to moksha. But it's a wonderful placement for astrology, psychic, all the metaphysical subjects. And it could also be, I'm guessing, I haven't met these people, but I'm guessing that a large amount of people that might be in the CIA, KGB, I was asking my British friend, what's it called over there? I think he said something like MK45 or something, I forget what. But any secretive organization hidden from view, you know,
Right.
it also strikes me that the people that worked on the atomic bomb might have had something like Pluto in the eighth house, this intense energy. If Pluto enters the eighth house, I say this is a wonderful period now for intense psychological evolution, letting go of attachments. It's going to be great for astrology and metaphysics, things like that. But it might have some negative effect on if you're expecting, somebody's going to leave you an inheritance, or the insurance company's going to give you large sums of money. Pluto going into the eighth house might have a say in that, and might say, no, you're not going to get this money. You have karma to pay off, something like that. But if Pluto goes into the eighth house, that person's going to go through, an intense experience of regeneration. If Pluto's in the ninth house, then the person is intent on religion, philosophy, higher knowledge. They're going to be very interested in higher knowledge, religion, philosophy. They're going to love gurus. They will travel. They will love travel. If Pluto enters the ninth house, that's going to be their period for travel and higher knowledge and religion, philosophy. Pluto in the 10th house is likely to be some intense experience with the person's father. And it could be anything. It could be the father dies early, the father is emotionally gone, the father's something's wrong with him, or it could be the father's powerful and intense and powerful and spiritual. Pluto entering the 10th house, I always tell a person, these are the years. If there's anything you've ever wanted to accomplish in the career, these are your best years. There's going to be a tremendous amount of energy going toward the career at that time. And if the person has any kind of healing tendencies, and Pluto enters that 10th house, your healing, you may have been healing one-on-one. You're about to decide you want to heal everybody. You're about to decide, how do I heal, not so much the individuals, but I want to heal everybody. That's Pluto in the 10th. But when Pluto enters that 10th house, keep an eye on your father's health and the career. Pluto in the 11th is going to be having to do with a person's major goals and desires and their friends. So my closest friend on Earth has Pluto in the 11th house. I'm his best friend. I'm a Pluto person.
Right.
So you may have very intense experiences with friends and with groups, and you may have friends that are famous or powerful, like that. And the Pluto in the 11th house may also have to do with your major goals and desires. You may have bigger world lifetime goals than other people. If Pluto enters the 11th house, I say keep an eye on your friendships. There may be you may now come into contact with friends that are Plutonian, intense, powerful, famous. But you could also have friends die. Pluto is death. Pluto is like Scorpio. I wouldn't expect someone to die necessarily, but if you're older, if you're older, your friends are dying anyway. But when Pluto goes into the 11th house, it will have a bigger impact. It'll have a big impact at that point because Pluto's in the 11th. If Pluto is in the 12th house natally, then the person's got a lot going on in the subconscious mind. And I remember I have one brother who has Pluto in the 12th house. There's so much in this guy's unconscious mind that he's unaware of, but you can see it. You can see things going on, kind of, I don't know how to explain it, but, some people you look at them and you say, they're not hiding anything. They're not, and then you have somebody with Pluto in the 12th house and you look at them and you say, what the hell's going on inside there? Something's going on. But there was a year in his life, he has Pluto, Mars, and Saturn in the 12th house. Mars and Saturn closely conjunct in the 12th, and Pluto's pretty close as well. There was a year in his life,
Yeah.
around the first grade, he was angry, enraged. He was enraged for, I don't remember how long it was, but it seems like it was about a year. And I remember I was talking with my eldest brother. We were reminiscing, and my brother said, "What happened to him in that year? Do you remember when he was just angry? Like he would go on rampages. He would throw lamps at the television for months on end. He was enraged." Now, today you'd bring him to the psychiatrist. Back then, they just kind of watched it happen and waited until it went away. So there's a lot going on in the subconscious mind there. Now, on the positive level, I would imagine that it would make a person very spiritual. They would be intent on discovering what's in the subconscious mind and discovering and trying to work out the influences that happen during childhood, and how to heal them, heal the damage and things like that. If Pluto goes transits into the 12th house, then I tell the person, you're about to have a lot more dreams at night. You're going to have things from the subconscious mind coming up so you can deal with them. And I would also say, if you have any desires for moksha, for enlightenment, now is the time. So it's a very spiritual feature.
So if someone has like Pluto in the 12th house, or like, is there like, other than, of course, like meditating and, maybe slowing down and going inwards, so they can also do some sort of therapies to just kind of manage, the intensities. Like, for example, like you had mentioned in the 12th house.
If it depends on how the Pluto is operating. If
Right.
the Pluto in the 12th house makes the person say, "I've had it. I'm going to India. I'm not coming back until I'm enlightened," it could do that. That would be the positive element. There is such an intensity on the person has come to realize that their life is being run by the unconscious mind, and they've had enough of it, and they say, "I want out of this suffering. I want enlightenment." That becomes a positive use of it. But it could also be people that have problems that they are unaware of, but even then it could bring them to therapy. It could easily bring them to therapy, but there's a lot going on. You don't look at their face and say, "Oh, I can see who they are." You look at them and you say, "Gosh, they've got a lot of different sides of the personality."
Right.
Something like that.
Interesting. Thank you. Thank you
My
so much
pleasure.
for joining us, and thank you for this wonderful information and sharing this knowledge with us.
You're
And thank
quite
you everyone for watching this video. I hope you everyone enjoy it and give us a thumbs up if you do.
okay.